The dog would not eat. He lay on the cracked linoleum of the diner's back corner, chin flat against the floor, ribs rising and falling too slow, too shallow. A German shepherd, black and tan gone dull. The kind of animal that had once been all muscle and purpose, and now looked like a coat draped over bones. In front of him sat a stainless steel bowl, brimming with warm chicken and rice that a cook had made special, and the dog had not touched it. 12 days. Nobody in the diner knew that number yet, but the man kneeling beside the animal did, and his hands were shaking. The man wore a plain gray jacket zipped to the throat. Under it, though no one could see, was a body held together by titanium and stubbornness. He pressed his palm to the dog's neck and whispered something no one caught, and the dog's tail moved once, a single slow sweep across the floor, and then went still again. "Sir," a young waitress said gently, "is he okay?" The man didn't answer. He couldn't, and that was when the woman behind the counter, heavy-set, silver threading her dark hair, an apron tied twice around her waist, went completely still. She had been wiping a glass. The rag stopped moving. Her lips parted. She was staring at the dog's collar, at a small brass tag catching the light, and all the color drained out of her face like water from a cracked cup. She set the glass down without looking at it. She knew that dog. "Before we begin, I want to ask you something. Wherever you are watching from tonight, a kitchen, a truck cab, a quiet room at the end of a long day, take 1 second and tell me your town in the comments. I would love to know who's out there, and if you believe that the quietest people among us are often the ones carrying the heaviest things, the ones who never ask to be seen, then please subscribe and stay with me, because this story is about exactly that kind of person. Now, let's go back to the beginning. The diner was called Ray's, and it sat off a 2-lane highway in the flat country east of nowhere, where the fields ran brown in winter and the wind came straight off them with nothing to slow it down. Dolores Kemp had worked there for 4 years. Everyone called her Del. She was the one who unlocked the door at 5 in the morning and flipped the sign, the one who knew that Mr. Clert Abernathy took his coffee with 3 sugars and would deny it. The one who kept a jar of peppermints by the register because some people needed something sweet, more than they needed to be asked why. She was a big woman, and she had made peace with that a long time ago. She moved slower than the young girls who came and went through the diner's revolving employment, but she never dropped a plate, never forgot an order, never let a cup go empty. There was an economy to the way she worked, a stillness underneath the motion, as if some part of her was always watching the room, always counting exits, always aware of who had come in and where they'd sat and what their hands were doing. Nobody noticed that. Why would they? She was just Del, the pleasant, heavy woman who ran the floor at Ray's and hummed old hymns while she rolled the silverware into napkins. At 4 in the afternoon, she tied on her apron. At 5, she set out the ketchup bottles. At 6, she served a plate of meatloaf to a trucker who tipped in quarters and told her she had a kind face. She thanked him. She meant it. Kindness cost nothing, and she had learned the hard way that it was the only currency that never lost its value. But before that long shift ended, the secret Del had carried for 6 years, the one folded up small and locked away where even she tried not to look at it, would walk through the front door on 4 unsteady legs. Here is what the diner did not know about Dolores Kemp. 20 years before she ever poured a cup of coffee at Ray's, she had been Staff Sergeant Dolores Kemp, and she had been one of the finest combat medics the Army had ever trained. She had done 3 tours. She had crawled through places whose names never made the news, dragging men twice her size out of the dark by their collars, packing wounds with her bare hands, breathing for the ones who had forgotten how. She had a way of staying calm when the world came apart. That same stillness she carried now, and men had lived because of it, who had no business living. And there had been a program, near the end, that she'd been folded into almost by accident. A joint thing. Special operations units and their working dogs, and the medics who learned to treat both. She had spent 18 months attached to a SEAL element as their trauma specialist, and she had learned to love those dogs the way you love something that would die for you without a second's hesitation, because that is exactly what they would do and sometimes did. There had been one team in particular, one handler, one dog. But that is getting ahead of things. Del left the Army after an explosion took the hearing in one ear, and something less visible along with it. She came home to a country that did not quite have a place for her. And she found she could not stand to be thanked. She could not stand the way people looked at her when they learned what she'd been, the way their faces rearranged themselves into something careful and distant, as if she were made of a material that might go off. So she stopped telling anyone. She let the weight come, and in a strange way, she was grateful for it, because it made her invisible, and invisible was the only thing that felt safe. She built a life small enough to hold in 2 hands, a rented room, a shift at a diner, a jar of peppermints. She had spent 6 years making herself into someone no one would ever ask a single hard question of. It had worked. Right up until the evening the door opened and the colt came in, and a man in a gray jacket carried a dying dog inside like an offering. The bell over the door rang at 7:40. Dell heard it the way she heard everything. Before she turned to look, she was refilling the napkin dispensers at the far booth, and she felt the change in the room before she understood it. The little drop in temperature, the pause in conversation, the way the 2 truckers at the counter turned on their stools. A man stood in the doorway holding a dog in his arms. He was tall, gaunt in the face, maybe 40, though grief can add years the way nothing else can. The dog hung limp against his chest, legs dangling, head lolling against his forearm. Not dead, but close to something. "Please," the man said. His voice was scraped raw. Can I put him down somewhere warm, just for a minute?" "He won't." He stopped. Started again. "He hasn't eaten. I've tried everything. I just need somewhere to sit." The young waitress on shift with Dell that night, a sweet girl named Kayla, 19 and new, froze up the way people do when a situation has no menu item. She looked at Dell. Dell was already moving. "Corner booth," she said, her voice even and low. "By the heater. Bring him here, hon. Floor's clean. I did it myself an hour ago." "Kayla, get a couple of the folded tablecloths from the back. The soft ones." The man carried the dog to the corner and laid him down on the tablecloths Dell arranged. And she got her first real look at the animal. And something in her chest went very quiet and very cold. She knew the breed of stillness in that dog. She had seen it in men in aid stations. It was the stillness of a body that had decided to stop. "How long since he ate?" she asked. 12 days, the man said. He sat down hard on the booth bench, like his legs had been waiting for permission to quit. 12 days. He drinks a little water. That's all. The vet ran everything. Blood work, scans, all of it. There's nothing physically wrong with him. Nothing they can find. He put his face in his hands. They told me to prepare myself. They said sometimes a dog just decides, after, that sometimes they grieve themselves to death, and there's nothing you can do." "After?" Dell repeated softly. "After what?" The man lifted his head, and for the first time she saw the flatness in his eyes that she recognized better than her own reflection. "After we lost his handler," he said, "my brother. 6 weeks ago." Dell crouched down. No small thing for a woman her size, and her knees told her about it. And she looked at the dog. Really looked. He was old for a working dog. Gray had crept into the black around his muzzle. There was a scar along one flank, healed years ago. The fur grown back a shade lighter. And around his neck, on a collar worn soft with age, hung a brass tag. She did not need to read it. But she read it anyway, and the world tilted. The tag said one word, a name, a dog's name, the kind of name a handler gives an animal when they are young and stupid and think the war will be an adventure. Biskuri. Dell's hand went to the edge of the table. Her knuckles whitened. Kayla, watching, thought for a second the older woman might faint, and stepped toward her. But Dell waved her off with a small motion, the smallest motion, and stayed where she was, crouched by the dog, breathing, because she knew this dog. She had known this dog when his muzzle was all black and his eyes were bright, and he was so full of drive he could barely hold a stay. She had pulled a piece of shrapnel out of that flank herself in a field tent with a young handler holding the dog's head and murmuring nonsense to keep him calm. A handler who had cried, actually cried, when Dell told him the dog would be fine, and who had been so embarrassed about it that he made her promise never to tell the other guys. That handler's name rose up in her throat like something drowning, but she said nothing. Not yet. She had spent 6 years saying nothing. The habit held even now. She reached out, slowly, and let the dog smell the back of her hand. The dog's nose twitched. His eyes, which had been half closed and fixed on nothing, moved, found her hand, then moved up, to her face. And something happened in that animal that no one in the diner could explain. A stirring, a flicker, the ghost of an old recognition passing through a body that had given up. His tail lifted, fell, lifted again. The man in the gray jacket stared. He hasn't done that, and he couldn't finish. If you have ever loved someone the world decided to overlook, a quiet parent, a tired veteran, a person who gave everything and asked for nothing and was thanked with silence, then do something for me right now. Type "never judge" in the comments. Not for me, for them, for every person we've walked past without knowing what they were carrying, because in a moment, you're going to see exactly why that matters. Now, back to the diner, where a dog who had decided to die had just lifted his head for a stranger. The man's name was Daniel. He told her while the dog's tail moved its slow, uncertain rhythm against the tablecloth. Daniel had been a SEAL, was still, technically, though a bad night in a bad place had ended the part of his career that involved being in the field. The handler, the dog's handler, the man who had raised Biscuit from a pup and deployed with him 4 times and slept beside him in more countries than he could name, had been Daniel's teammate. More than that, the two of them had come up together, had saved each other's lives so many times that the debt between them had stopped meaning anything, the way you don't keep count of breaths. 6 weeks ago, the handler had died. Daniel did not say how, and Dell did not ask, because she knew the shape of the not saying and she respected it. "He left me the dog," Daniel said. "In everything. All the paperwork, all the arrangements. The one thing he'd set up years ago was that if anything happened, Biscuit came to me, and I promised. I promised him I'd take care of this dog." His voice broke, finally, all the way through. "And now I'm sitting in a diner watching him starve to death because I can't figure out what he needs, and I'm failing him. I'm failing both of them." "You're not failing anybody," Dell said. Something in how she said it made him look up. It was not the automatic comfort of a stranger. It was flatter than that, and more certain. The voice of someone who had said those exact words before, in worse places, to people who had needed to believe them. "You don't know that," Daniel said. "I do, actually," Dell said quietly. "I know it better than you'd think." And then a man 2 booths over, a big man in a canvas coat who had been listening with the particular sourness of someone who thinks other people's troubles are a performance, spoke up. "It's a dog," he said. "I'm sorry for your loss and all, but you can't bring a sick animal into a place where people are eating. That's a health thing. There's rules." The diner went quiet. Daniel's shoulders dropped another inch. He was too tired to fight. He started to gather himself, started to reach for the dog, to lift him, to carry his grief back out into the cold, because a stranger had decided it didn't belong indoors. "He stays," Dell said. She did not raise her voice. She rose to her feet, slowly, deliberately, all of her, and she turned to face the man in the canvas coat. And there was something in her stance now that had not been there a minute ago. A squareness, a stillness that was not soft. "This is my floor," she said. "I mopped it. I decide what's clean enough to be on it. That dog has more right to be warm tonight than most people I've served. And if the health inspector's got a problem, he can call me directly. Now finish your coffee or don't, but you leave that man alone while he does it." The canvas coat man opened his mouth, looked at her face, closed it, looked back down at his coffee. Dell turned back to Daniel as if nothing had happened. But Daniel was staring at her now, because he had spent 20 years around people who could command a room without shouting, and he had just watched a heavy-set diner waitress do it as naturally as breathing. And something in the back of his mind, some old operator's instinct that never fully switched off, had begun very quietly to ask a question. "You've been around dogs," Daniel said slowly. "Working dogs, haven't you?" Dell didn't answer. She had gone to the kitchen. He could hear her back there, moving, the clink of a pan, the low murmur of her talking to the cook. She came back a few minutes later carrying a plate, not a bowl. A plate, a real one, warmed, and on it she had put a portion of the meatloaf and a spoonful of mashed potatoes, and she had crumbled the meatloaf up fine with her fingers. And she set it down on the floor, not in front of the dog, but a little way off at the edge of his reach, so that he would have to make a choice to come to it. And then she did something strange. She sat down on the floor herself, with her back against the booth, groaning at her own knees, and she took a second plate, a small one, just for herself, with a single piece of cornbread on it, and she began, unhurried, to eat. She did not look at the dog. She did not coax him. She did not say his name. She just sat on the floor of her own diner and ate a piece of cornbread in the warm light, humming very softly the way she'd hummed while she rolled silverware. Though Daniel could not have known this, she had once hummed in a field tent to keep a wounded dog calm while she worked shrapnel out of his flank. And Biscuit lifted his head. He looked at the plate. He looked at the woman beside it who was paying him no mind at all, who was simply there, warm and unbothered and eating, the way pack members eat together when the day's work is done and the danger is past. He got his front legs under him. Then, trembling, the rest of him, and he walked 4 unsteady steps to the plate, and he lowered his head, and he ate. The whole diner watched a starving dog eat, and not one person made a sound. Daniel had his hand pressed over his mouth. Tears were running freely down his face, and he wasn't wiping them. Kayla was crying openly by the register. Even the man in the canvas coat had turned to watch, and his sour expression had gone somewhere soft and stunned. Dell kept eating her cornbread, but her eyes had filled and one tear had spilled and was tracking down through the lines of her face, and she let it. Because some things, you do not stop. How? Daniel whispered when the dog had eaten half the plate and lay down again. But different now, settled, his breathing deeper. How did you know to do that? The plate. The sitting with him. How did you know? Dell was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into the pocket of her apron and took out something she had carried there for 6 years, moving it from apron to apron, shift to shift, the way some people carry a photograph or a wedding ring. It was a small, flat object wrapped in a square of soft cloth. She unwrapped it with hands that were steady now. It was a patch, faded, frayed at one edge, the kind of unit patch that means nothing to a civilian and everything to the people who earned it. Daniel looked at it, and the color went out of his face the way it had gone out of Dell's an hour before, because he knew that patch. He had one exactly like it in a box at home. Where did you get this? He breathed. I earned it, Dell said simply. And then she told him, slowly, one piece at a time, the way you give bad news or unwrap something precious. She told him she had been a medic. She told him the years, and he did the math. And the math worked. She told him the name of the element she'd been attached to, and Daniel went utterly still because it was his. Not his current team. The old one. The one from the early days. The one from before. I was there for 18 months, Dell said. I patched up half of you boys at one time or another. You won't remember me. I was just the medic. People don't remember the medic unless they're bleeding. A small, sad smile. But I remember all of you. The dog, Daniel said. Biscuit. His flank, the scar, field tent, outside a place I'm still not supposed to name, Dell said. Piece of shrapnel, about the size of your thumbnail, in deep. His handler held his head while I dug it out. 19 years old. That kid was, and he cried like a baby when I told him the dog would live, and then he made me swear on my life I'd never tell the other guys he cried. Her voice thickened. I never did. I'm sorry, son. I'm telling you now. But I never told a soul before tonight. Daniel was shaking his head, not in denial but in something like awe, in the vertigo of a world folding back on itself. He started, and then he said the handler's name, the dead man, his brother. He said it out loud in the warm diner, and it hung there. And Dell nodded, and her tears came properly now, because she had known. She had known the moment she read the tag. She had known whose dog this was, and that meant she had known sitting there crumbling meatloaf onto a plate, that the bright-eyed 19-year-old who cried over his wounded dog and made her promise to keep his secret was gone from the world. I knew him, she said. For 18 months, I knew him. He used to save the peanut butter from his rations for this dog. Wasn't supposed to. Did it anyway. She laughed wetly. That's why the plate. Biscuit never ate like a dog. That boy raised him to eat like people. Off a plate, at the end of the day with his family around him. That's what he's been missing. Not food. Not medicine. Company. He didn't stop eating because he's sick. He stopped eating because the person he ate with was gone, and nobody had sat down and eaten with him since. The room had gathered close by now. The truckers. Kayla, the cook, wiping his hands on his apron in the kitchen doorway. Even the man in the canvas coat had drifted nearer. His earlier hardness dissolved entirely. A man ashamed of himself and trying to make it right by bearing witness. Daniel slid off the booth bench and onto the floor beside the dog, and he put his hand on Biscuit's side and felt it rise and fall. Deeper now. Steadier. He set it up so the dog would come to me, Daniel said. If anything happened. He trusted me with the most important thing he had. He looked at Dell, but I didn't know how to reach him. I've been carrying him around for 6 weeks, trying every food, every vet, and it took 10 minutes with you. It didn't take 10 minutes, Dell said gently. It took 20 years. You just didn't see the part that came before. She reached over and, for the first time, laid her broad hand flat on the dog's head, and Biscuit leaned into it, and his tail moved. "Hello, old man," she murmured. "You remember me, don't you? I've got older and heavier and slower, but you remember. Dogs always remember the ones who put their hands inside them and stitched them back up." Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry about you, boy. I'm so sorry. He was one of the good ones. They were all good ones." Daniel was quiet a while. Then he said, "Why'd you hide it? All this, everything you were. You saved lives. You saved his life, that dog's life, probably some of mine I don't even remember. Why are you slinging meatloaf in the middle of nowhere pretending to be nobody?" Dell was a long time answering. "Because when I came home," she said, "people looked at me like I was a thing that might break, or a thing that might go off, and I got tired of it. I got tired of being thanked by folks who couldn't look me in the eye. So I made myself into someone nobody'd ever think, nobody'd ever ask. I just wanted to be left alone to do a little good in a small way and not be seen doing it." She looked down at the dog. "Turns out the war's got a way of walking back through your door, no matter how quiet you keep it. I don't think I mind tonight. I think maybe I've been waiting for this dog to walk in without knowing it." A year went by. The highway east of nowhere still ran flat and brown in winter, and the wind still came off the fields with nothing to slow it. Ray's Diner still unlocked its doors at 5 in the morning, and Dolores Kemp, Dell to everyone, still flipped the sign and started the coffee. But some things were different now. There was a dog bed in the corner booth by the heater, a good one, thick and warm, and on most evenings there was a German shepherd curled up in it, gray in the muzzle, slow in the hips, but bright in the eye. Biscuit had come to live at the diner. It had been Daniel's idea and Dell's blessing, because Daniel traveled for work and could not give the old dog what he needed, and what the old dog needed, it turned out, was Dell, and a warm floor she'd mopped herself and a plate at the end of the day in company while he ate. He ate every night now, off a plate, at the edge of Dell's reach, so he had to choose to come to it, and he always chose. And most nights Dell sat down on the floor beside him, groaning at her knees, and ate a piece of cornbread while he ate his supper. The two of them keeping each other company the way Pack does when the day's work is done and the danger is past. Daniel came when he could. He'd drive 4 hours to sit in the corner booth and drink coffee and watch the old dog sleep, and he and Dell would talk in the low voices of people who have seen the same things, and sometimes they wouldn't talk at all, and that was fine too. On the wall above the dog bed, Dell had hung 2 things. One was a faded unit patch, frayed at one edge, framed now behind glass. The other was a photograph Daniel had brought her. A young man, 19, all grin and sunburn, kneeling in the dust of a country far away with his arms wrapped around a black and tauten puppy who would grow up to be Biscuit. On the back, in Daniel's handwriting, was the boy's name and 2 dates and the words, "He saved the peanut butter." Every time. Nobody who came into Ray's for a plate of meatloaf knew what any of it meant. They saw a heavy-set waitress with a kind face and an old dog by the heater, and they thought, what a sweet, quiet place. What a sweet, quiet woman. Which was exactly right, and not even close to the whole of it. And on the coldest nights when the diner had emptied and the sign was flipped and the coffee was off, Dell would lower herself down onto the floor beside the old dog, and she would put her hand on his side and feel him breathing deep and easy, and she would hum an old hymn very softly into the dark. The same tune she'd hummed in a field tent 20 years and a whole lifetime ago, keeping a wounded dog calm while she stitched him back into the world. He remembered it. He always would. Because dogs remember the ones who put their hands inside them and stitch them back up. And so, it turns out, do the rest of us, if we're lucky enough, one cold night to finally sit down and be seen. If this story reached something in you tonight, stay with me. This channel is for the quiet ones, the medics nobody remembered, the dogs who grieved, the people who carried the heaviest things and never asked to be thanked. Subscribe and sit with us a while. There's always an extra plate at this table, and there's always room on the floor for one more. Good night.